Okay everyone, so I'm going to review today two options which I have spoken about in the articles below. So that's a Capital International Group, mainly in the Isle of Man, and also a platform called Momentum, which is in Luxembourg, but they also brand with Capital Platforms, which is slightly different. I know it's confusing, but it's slightly different to Capital International Group as well. So basically, to summarize these two options, I'm not going to go into the nitty gritty because that's in the article below, but basically they are not bad options in the expat market, but basically your mileage will vary. In other words, person one could be with advisor one and do very well. Person two could be with advisor two and do not so well. Person one could be a very patient buy and hold investor and do well. Person two could be the kind of person who panics every time markets are down and doesn't do so well. So always bear in mind, people often overanalyze this point. A lot of people, they get very over analytical, I'd say, about platforms. Essentially, a platform or an investment company is just, you could call it an umbrella to hold your investments in. So things like how nice the IT system looks, it's irrelevant. And even when it comes to things like investor protections, regardless of where your money is in the UK, Luxembourg, UK overseas territory like Isle of Man, Bermuda, so on and so forth, essentially most major institutions now have protections for investors. So it isn't the case at all just because you're of a UK regulated company that means your assets are more safe than say if you're in Bermuda or Isle of Man or Puerto Rico or whatever. And in actual fact, I would say there are some negatives as well as positives to the UK's regulation. It's a double-edged sword. I'll give you some specific examples of that. Let's say that you as an investor want 90% of your assets in kind of low-cost long-term funds, and you want 10% in something which is a bit more racy, you could say, or a bit more sexy, or a bit more, risky, depending on how you look at it. The UK regulator will usually make you certify as a high net wealth investor. In other words, if you're a millionaire or indeed you're just high income, you usually have to sign to say, I understand the risks, blah, blah, blah. But let's say you're making $70,000, $80,000 a year, or indeed £40,000, £50,000 or whatever, or less. You might want access to those kind of investments for whatever reason. I'm not saying if it's right or wrong for you to want access to those investments, but it's very hard in a UK regulated environment for middle class people to get access to those kinds of investments. Likewise, when it comes to the so-called guarantees, it's true to say UK government, it does have some kind of protections in terms of if there's a financial crisis, your money is partially, guaranteed a certain percentage of it. But ask yourself an important question. In the last 10 or 20 years, how many US banks have gone bankrupt? A lot, right? And how regulated is the US? A lot. UK as well. How regulated is the UK? A lot. How many financial crises has the UK had in the last 20 years? Actually more than many countries. So the point I'm making is, even though it's more regulated, that doesn't always make it safer. So many offshore jurisdictions, they have something called the segregated account system, where, to put it in very simple terms, let's say the company's assets are here and your assets are here. So even if the company goes bankrupt, your assets are still here, which means you don't need a government guarantee by definition because it negates the need for that guarantee. So one of the biggest mistakes I've seen expat investors make is assume that certain jurisdictions like the UK, Luxembourg, whatever, are automatically safer. That's not the case. A well-regulated solution isn't always a positive. It can be, but it can also be a negative. And I think we've seen that in the banking sector. When was the last time you heard of a Cayman Islands bank going bankrupt or a Bermuda bank going bankrupt? It doesn't happen very much because, the institutions, they have to behave themselves more because they know they're not going to be, guaranteed. Whereas if institutions know they've got a government guarantee, it could be argued that that's one of the reasons Lehman Brothers went bankrupt, right? That they had that protection of a guarantee. It encouraged them to behave badly. So don't believe if an advisor says, you know what, this is regulated in the UK, so that means it's a great option. It's not that simple.